Well, kia ora everybody, and a very special hello to Kate Newby, who we're talking to today as part of our Shift series of artist interviews for the Auckland Art Gallery Foundation. And thank you to everybody who's joining in to be part of this conversation. And I want to say a special thank you again to Kate, because she's joining us from her home in Texas after a very wonderful time in New Zealand. So hello, Kate, how are you getting on there?
Hi Sue, I'm good. It's completely different weather than what you have in New Zealand, but it's also not unenjoyable.
Well, we did actually meet you, a little band of New Zealanders did actually meet you in a different part of Texas a few years ago when you were doing the Marfa residency. So for those of us who've been to that part of the world, we can kind of have a slight picture of the landscape. But of course, for you, Kate, the connection of landscape and of local engagement with plants and trees and wind and clouds and sun are so important to you. And it's something that I get the feeling has really accelerated in the last 12 months when you've had a time of shifting around a lot. Shall we think and jet back to where you were 12 months ago? Because it was New York, wasn't it?
It was this time a year ago, almost to the day. I was fully masked up, and this is me standing in my neighborhood in Greenpoint with the Manhattan skyline in the background. And I remember this day very clearly because it was springtime, birds were starting to fly everywhere, and blossoms were blossoming, and everything was still very much shut down. I couldn't buy a takeaway coffee. I just up and then go home and sit in the apartment. And it's really interesting to think that was just 12 months ago. So much has happened. What happened was when everything shut down, my glass studio shut down, my foundry shut down. So all these avenues that I'd been using to create work were no longer available. So if we skip to the next image, you'll see the how packed it is. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, this is the social distancing happening in the park, Kate.
Yeah. And that's also New York City. It's just always packed, and there's always so many people around. So when you're in a pandemic, you really just want to be alone, I think.
I should point out to people that Kate's speaking from her home in Texas, which has a little bit of an unreliable Wi-Fi coverage. So from an audience, just letting our audience know that might drop in and out a little bit, but on the whole, we're doing really well, and Kate's hotspotting best she can. So Kate, it's been a lot of changes for you, a lot of traveling, a lot of moving. It's actually something that you've actually done for quite a bit of time, maybe even over the last 10 years or so, is move around and have quite intense experiences in different forms of landscape. But you left New York, didn't you, when things became difficult? As you said, things were shut down. Your whole kind of mode of practice kind of came to a halt, because you've always engaged with people through different production techniques and through your kind of wanderings, if you like, around a city. And if you can't do that anymore, what did you decide to do?
Well, the last image you saw my little studio, and you saw how small it was. And I was okay for a couple of months, but after a couple of months, I was like, I can't bear this. There's only so much organizing I can do, because I wasn't really able to make anything. And a friend offered her house out in a small town called Alta, outside of Salt Lake City in Utah. And this is where it is. It's at 11,000 feet altitude. It's really high up in the mountains. So I decided to leave New York and just spend some time out in Utah, in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know anyone, but it was just this completely wild landscape. And I was thinking about the way that I work, and often I travel and I make work, but often it's for an exhibition. And then with shows getting cancelled last year, I had this restless, horrible feeling like I just wanted to make work. And how does that sort of play out when your exhibitions are cancelled and your ways of working have gone away? So it was a real experiment to spend 2 months out in Utah.
And then, of course, in Utah here, well, in that area, you were able to see some extremely kind of important examples of land art. And while these are on an enormous scale, but they've also been subject to all of the changes in landscape and water and heat and the comings and goings of the tides. So there's an element I can understand of how you're drawn to these land works. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about perhaps the influence or the inspiration or the knowledge of being able to witness these land works has on you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the things I really love about land art, and one of the things I also really loved about spending time in Marfa, Texas, was that these artists decided where they wanted their work to go and how they wanted their work to be seen and shown and installed. And so when you're just doing in sort of exhibitions and on the gallery circuit and this and this and this, you're sort of always like feeding the system. And what's really interesting is that the artists had this type of agency and they made these decisions to put their work in. For example, this is Sun Tunnels, and this is sort of far western Utah on the other side of Salt Lake. It's really in the middle of nowhere. I camped out here. No one was here. Spiral Jetty was packed, like lots of people were at Spiral Jetty. In fact, there was an image, someone was flying a kite, of a shark. They don't even know what they're looking at. People were just going out there because it's sort of a tourist attraction. And when I went out to Sun Tunnels, it was just completely empty. And it's really interesting because I know that Nancy Holt, she camped out here for several months, just sort of trying to figure out what could she see happening on this site. And I think about slowness, and I think about the consideration and the intention behind these works, and the fact that there is a huge longevity around them, but they're not public sculpture. All of these questions are things that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, I think because from our point of view, looking at these images now, Kate, there's this incredibly kind of acute or very alert observational process that you go through, and perhaps that would then be even more accelerated when you moved from this kind of environment. Well, you'd moved from the very packed city streets of New York, and suddenly here you were alone in this very flat and seemingly deserted environment. And then you made another shift again from here. Well, look at that there. Yeah, it's an amazing space, isn't it? But do you feel that when you're looking at something like this, time just kind of starts floating if you're there with the way the light changes and the works live and breathe the light around them?
I do. And I also just think about how dignified it is. Like if you go out there, you spend time, like you spend hours and hours and hours looking at the work and all these different light conditions. And I think, gosh, it's quite a beautiful way to view work and spend time with work, rather than the sort of like walking around a museum and spending, 45 minutes and then leaving. It's like, they set it up where you did have to spend this time looking at these works.
It's an amazing experience, isn't it, when you like this? Because what that does in a way to your body and your mind and your kind of psychology, if you like, is you almost feel this kind of sense of submission to the landscape and to nature. And that sense of submission to it is a kind of a relaxation of your kind of, oh, I've got to move on. I'm here. I've looked at this painting for 7 seconds. Now I must move on. Here you're in this completely.
Yeah. And I think it was challenging because in a way the slowness of 2020, I didn't want it to stop. I want it to continue. I want the slowness to continue. And at the same time, I had this sort of appetite. I really think through doing things and through using my hands, and when my fingers are dug in clay, everything sort of calms down in me. So
let's jump you on a plane, and after you've observed these incredible forms and landscapes through an artist's eye. Here's your, what's this one, Kate?
Yeah, this was really interesting because the house had a garage and I haven't had a studio for a long time. But I started realizing you don't need a studio and you don't need someone to ask you to, to provide a residency or anything like that. So I just set up this temporary studio in a garage. I looked in a phone book and I found a foundry and I called around and I found a place to fire clay. And I also really loved just scrambling and grasping at straws in order to see what was possible. And it always takes me to these wild places. Like I ended up in Lehi, Utah, working at one of the biggest foundries in the US, and I never would have been there if I hadn't have stepped out of my comfort zone and left New York. So the studio was just this really unglamorous site, but it was this idea that you can just create the space that you need for whatever time you're in.
In a way, I kind of see that as a real sense of trust in your process as an artist, and that your knowledge about how to reach out to other people can then trigger interesting things to happen in the kind of collaboration. And you can find your people, if you like, wherever you go. You mentioned about there was a woman that you met who was teaching pottery. Was this at this time here? And she was encouraging you to move to this place?
No, I was a few years ago, I did 2 residencies in Texas, one in San Antonio and one in Marfa. The one in San Antonio, I gave a talk at the local art school, and I met a woman, a potter called Linda Perez, and she lives in Floresville, which is where I am now. So it was through visiting her, following her invitation to come and do a pit firing on her property, that I've ended up in Texas 4 years later. Right. So I like this idea that you, if you're in a position to move, you can. So
yeah, things are possible. Yeah. And now, so these observances, are these some of your prior to coming to New Zealand?
Yeah, so the images we're looking at, these are the things that I was discovering as I went on these long hikes, as I went through national parks like Zion and Bryce Canyon. And I was looking at a lot at land formations and space and light. And also I was, there was a huge amount of anxiety because of the pandemic, a huge amount of confusion. Like the confusion from 12 months ago to now is significantly less. And I can't underplay, and I'm sure we all felt this, I can't underplay how confused we were by the pandemic. I didn't know if I could open mail. I didn't know if I could use that onion without washing it. There was so much stuff. And so when I came into the forest, or when I was hiking, it was sort of the only time I really got to relax. And so these forms that I was looking at, I ended up using and casting and using in my work. And I think in a way, this time in Utah gave me a renewed sense of confidence in the way that I work for the upcoming trip that I then made to New Zealand. Right.
So was that, oh goodness, here's a character here. This is a moment, I imagine, to be able to witness.
Yeah, it was on my bucket list to see a moose. So I was very happy.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's wonderful. Well, it's on our bucket list to have had you back in New Zealand for a little while, which was wonderful. And so you did your isolation towards the end of last year, wasn't it, Kate? And sitting in isolation, which is again another strange psychological thing to experience in closed spaces. But once you were out of isolation, you ended up here. Where is this?
So this is a tile factory in Matakana called Middle Earth, and I approached them to work with them because they make these really beautiful hand extruded tiles with local clay. And I'm really happy they agreed to let me in, because once they did let me in, I just kept going back and back and back. But the very first day that I was out of my 2-week quarantine, I drove straight up to this tile factory and just, got to work for the exhibition at the Auckland Art Gallery.
So yes, so I think your initial plans for coming to New Zealand was to spend several months making the work for the Auckland Art Gallery, and it was a major exhibition where in a number of spaces, both inside the gallery and outside the gallery. in its immediate context. And so you'd been thinking, I guess, prior to actually arriving in New Zealand about developing the exhibition. And I think I can't really sort of imagine what that feeling for you would have been like to suddenly be now in a community of artists that was familiar to you. You know, you grew up, went to art school and worked with lots of artists through artist-run spaces in Auckland, and now here you were back again with kind of your community, well, one of the New Zealand community people. How important was that to you?
It was probably one of the most significant aspects of making this exhibition. I've been working largely on my own for years, and I'll go to places and work on my own with the sort of local community. This time coming back to New Zealand and having, you know, groups of people, family, friends, you know, new art students, old acquaintances, all these people kind of all come together in locations that I'm sort of familiar with. And it was just this it was quite overwhelming. It was really amazing to have the support. Like Fiona Connor came up to the tile factory and stuck her elbows in some clay with me. And, you know, we've worked alongside each other for years. And it's just really like, it was just everything sort of synchronized, that the amount of work and energy and focus needed to make the Adam Art Gallery show in probably quite a small amount of time. It couldn't have gone better, but it couldn't have happened without the support of so many different people and communities.
There seems to me, Kate, like this a new kind of optimism in that respect. And I think even the title of the exhibition, Yes, Tomorrow, is you've always had really curious, quite poetic titles for your work, but also for your exhibitions. And Yes, Tomorrow seems like a very optimistic to me, but quite a kind of a curious thing. And I know that you pick up incidental moments of conversation when you're with people. So being with people is in every aspect of what you do, is just so important. And to collaborate here with the Middle Earth people. And I think this photograph for me represents something really important that I think about your work as well, as this very kind of total immersement of the body as a equal partner to the landscape or to the materials that you're working with. So how does that feel for you? Because I can remember you almost describing some of your early moments with clay in your hands, or with material, and that engagement with your body, whether it's a little handful of stones that you're throwing out into the water, or whether you're here immersed making big gestures across wet clay.
Yeah, it's really interesting because often I'm trying to do things in the production of my work that I haven't done before. So I have to learn how to do it as I'm doing it. And I really love that just full focus you need in your body. You need to trust your body more than your mind, because if you think about it, you're not going to really know how to carve tiles. Like the tiles you can see in the image, there's two sides to them, because then they go through, they're fired and they don't warp, and then you've got two tiles. And I wasn't anticipating that. And I was like, how do I carve two sides? And so you just sort of give up, you sort of give over to the unknown. And your body often knows what to do in these situations more than you realize. So I think the combination of quarantine, haze, and like just sort of being also in quite a lot of shock to be around a lot of different people, talking to a lot of different people and touching people again. All these things are just kind of like in my body. When I was getting to make this, you know, work with this massive clay, it was interesting because I felt like I was being very first, and it took me most of my time in the workshop to like feel confident to do these larger gestures that ended up becoming these really key moments in the show.
And I think that that's so important, this idea of the tactile. Here we've got a few more images of the close-ups of some of the tiles. There were a range of different works. This kind of platform of tiles, if you like, was an outside area, and then you had the concrete with the markings again. So seeing it from above, this is just such a perfect thing of the idea of kind of drawing with the body in lines and directly into the surface there with I can almost kind of see the kind of the ghost of your body moving around, leaving these rhythms on the tiles. So it's wonderful to see it from this kind of aerial view, and in a way that sort of sense of intensity, making things close up, but then having the experience of being back and seeing what they are in the whole is sort of what the visitor experience when they view your work as well is like. Because remember one time you and I sat on your concrete platform out on the North Terrace at the Auckland Art Gallery, and we're sort of sitting, engaging in a very close-up way. But then from a distance, from Albert Park or something, you could see it from further away. So there's almost that kind of way that we often see landscape, actually, where we're close up to the beach or close up to the salt water when you saw the Smithson work, but from far away you get a sense of it completely different. So I think you bring the body of the visitor of the viewer into your work as well. And then as well as the body of the viewer, there was, in the case of the Adam Art Gallery, the body of your helpers, your family and your friends who helped you. Their bodies made the work.
Yeah, so one of the works in this exhibition was I wanted to make this sort of these thigh tiles, and I thought at first it would be like 2 or 3 meters, but then I did a site visit at the end of December and I realized no, this thing has to be 30 meters or 50, I can't remember, 40 meters. So instead of making 20 tiles, I ended up needing to make 270 tiles. This is my mother helping me organize them on the lawn. And this is the how the tiles eventually went. So when I came down and walked around with Tina Barton, I saw this hill, and you could see this hill from up at the Adam. And I just thought that's like the perfect site. Like you can see it from far away. You can walk down to it. You can walk along it. And it can involve the weather, the water, the grass growing, everything. So it was this thing of if I'd known how hard it was, I definitely probably wouldn't have done it. But because I was so motivated by trying to ask questions about what was possible, I kept going with it. And it was a really quite a moving moment in the exhibition for me, because lots and lots of people came together, also through some workshops organised by Te Whare Hera in Wellington, part of Massey University. A lot of people came and sat with very cold clay on their legs for a couple of hours. And it was really humbling, the amount of support that I was getting from people I didn't know. I mean, my mother has to help me. She's obliged to help me. These other people, it was their choice, and it really did mean like quite a lot. And I think that comes through on the work.
That's right. And I think, Kate, from looking at these images here, where the artwork, for me, I kind of see it like a breakdown of hierarchies. There's not the work, the plinth, the floor, the lighting, and the place that you find art is so important and seems to be such an active component in your art practice. So with the channel that you've cut into the hill, it's the angle that it's at, it's the line that the channel makes, and then it's the bodies of the people themselves that are almost kind of lying on the land on the same level as them. That's what I think's really, in a way, that kind of speaks to a certain kind of philosophy about nature or about materials, isn't it? Our body is nature materials, the clay is nature materials, glass and everything. So that's in a way why you love picking up materials from kind of found, we might call it detritus, kind of found elements, and then you link that to other things you've seen. The whole thing's kind of like a web of observations.
Yeah, I often think of myself as doing observational research. So it's a lot of walking, it's a lot of thinking. I need a lot of quiet and a lot of slow time. And this image you see, if you move forward into the next couple of images, you'll see these little things that I made by collecting little pieces of glass on the streets of Wellington, putting them into these little dishes, and then again cutting my own channel in the gallery to show these things. And I really am intrigued by this work because it's using this readily available material, which is broken glass from bottles and whatever. and then you sort of like, it sort of goes through such a transformation to become this whole other thing. And I think this is also where scale comes in, because it's this tiny little thing that you collect, but then when you're collecting it from all across Wellington, you also, like, you don't really know where the space is in the work or where the location is in the work, because it's a lot through walking and looking and and I had friends picking up pieces of glass and bigger pieces of glass. You've just got, you know, this excavation and then excavating the gallery to show these works. So this was one work, and I also removed window panes and inserted my own window panes into the building. So a lot of these works were using spaces that you wouldn't ordinarily find artworks.
I almost see it as it's bringing, we talked about the relationship between the body, between your body, your materials, the people who are working with you, but also the architecture becomes the body also to think about transforming. And then because of your experiences loving nature, being alone with the wind and the light, and here you are bringing the wind directly into the gallery, again breaking down all those hierarchies about what an art museum should be and how carefully we must protect the humidity in the air and so on. So it's bringing everything in together and thinking about your people picking up glass around the city, not knowing what the outcome would be. I love this idea. It feels almost like I want to think about something like intentional vagueness or something, you know, like it's intentional to open it up to all of these different people and to let just the flow of the gathering of the materials happen. And so there's a kind of a vagueness in that, because it just takes you not quite know where you might end up. You're sort of following this trail of things, and then that kind of gets brought in together and kind of held in within this kind of architectural space. And so but that architectural space itself is porous.
Yeah, I mean, it felt really amazing, and it felt like a real honor to be able to use the entirety of the building. So everything I did was quite focused, and there's lots and lots and lots of empty space. So I've been going to the Atom for years. You know, I went down especially to see that Joseph Kasuth exhibition, I think in 2000 or 2001. I don't know, like I've been going there for years, and often these main spaces are filled up, and I managed to avoid putting any work into these sort of the upper Chartwell, or, you know, there's very little work. And this is where land art comes back in, and where Donald Judd and the Shinardi Foundation come back in, because you've just got this ability to just do what needs to be done, like one or two things, and using the space around it as a part of the work itself. So it was real, like for me, it was really interesting to just incorporate and work collaboratively with the building. So I wasn't trying to feel submissive, or I wasn't trying to be too antagonizing either, but it was this ability to weave my works using the scale of the building.
I love that description about weaving your works, because you've often made works that maybe start in the interior of the building and then go through a window and out to the outside, so that you're kind of weaving the inside and the outside together. There's a kind of, I imagine walking in the space, there must have been a certain kind of rhythm to how the works intersected with each space as you moved around them, because the Atom Art Gallery spaces are each space is actually quite different. And your work would have created, especially I think about this in terms of the rhythm of the potential of sound with this incredible wind chime and its connections to the building. So everything's kind of operating on a lot of very beautiful levels. And so, Kate, it was while you were here, though, you ended up staying a bit longer in New Zealand, didn't you? And thinking about more, here's this wonderful close-up of each individual made piece. But from here, it became a much bigger project, your making project in New Zealand. Did it, Kate? You decided that you were making more work as well.
I did. So, for example, these relationships that I made at the tile factory, and I fired lots of work with Duncan Shearer down in Pairoa, and I worked at a glass workshop in I just did so many different, I just got so much going that I really couldn't stop. So I just decided to keep going. So I continued making work. Some of it is for an exhibition in September at the Govett Brewster, curated by Megan Tamati Cornell, called Swallowing Geography. And so for that, building upon these cast glass forms, I realized that you can do sand cast glass, where you scrape into sand and remove it and then fill it with glass. And it's all these sort of material connections with excavating materials and working a lot with clay and glass and fingers and marking. So I just kept going because I had all this pent up energy from 2020, and I just went to New Zealand and just thoroughly had a ball.
You might have answered that question about how do you make an exhibition in a pandemic. You really managed to do that. I love this image so much. There's so much interaction going on with the architecture and the light, and it feels like a quite something out of 2001 or something. There's a real kind of strange space feeling to me. It's just to do with with that square of light at the end, I think, and and not getting a sense of the scale. So I think in a way all of these sort of emotions actually that you might have described thinking about 2020, the anxiety, the pent-up motivation to make work, it feels it's so deeply embedded in all of these works that you've made here in New Zealand. A whole lot of things have come together. You suddenly can work in these amazing spaces like Tile Factory and a potter's studio. You can connect back with communities, meet a whole lot more people, develop new relationships in terms of all the production and makers. And then the time came to return to Texas, and we're talking to you in about 40-degree heat. So how did that feel then? Hopefully it didn't feel like the end of possibilities for you. In fact, I think you may well be excited to be back in your Texas environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, and I only lived here for a month before I left. I went back to New York after Utah, and I just realized I didn't want to spend my life in a small apartment, and I moved here without much thought. And then I've come back here and I'm like, what am I doing? But I realized exactly how I make my work. So with the side tile work or with the tiles, I'm guided by impulse and curiosity, and then I work it out. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just sort of climatizing, because it is a completely different landscape. This is what it looked like before I left Texas, and now that I've come back, it's just completely green and flourishing, and everything's growing quite a lot and just changed. So what am I going to do here? How am I going to work? This is a garage that I'm thinking of turning into a studio, the one carport. And I just think, I'm just going to see what's possible. But it was really interesting to realize that the way that I work, I'm okay with many, many unknowns. And I think moving to Texas, it's filled with unknowns, but what it has is it has a lot of possibility. And if I was still in New York, I'd still be in that tiny little studio apartment, not really wanting to make a mess because my bedroom's right there and I've got to look at it all the time. It's like, at least here I can, walk around. I'm on 120 acres. I can walk around the ranch. I can sort of really figure out how to grow cacti, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I've just got things I can learn about. I'm putting my work in different situations. I'm not going to become a land artist, but it's really interesting to think about work in a context outside of the gallery. So I'm excited to be back here, and I have that nervous anticipation that I had walking into the Atom, and it was completely empty. And I was talking with Andy and Sophie and Tina, and we were like, let's make a show. We've got six weeks. So it's a sort of same feeling of, I'm up for the challenge. So.
Oh, brilliant. We know you're up for the challenge. And what I love about that is almost embracing that, the unknown, which is a very exciting and creative place to be in. It's where thinking and feeling all comes together, and you call it intuition, I guess. So it's sort of all happening there, Kate. And we really appreciate all the time that you've taken with us today, and also when we join with our group on the Wednesday evening cocktail chat, people will understand the time difference there as well. You're in the heat of the late afternoon. We're having our morning coffee, but Kate, we want to thank you. We really thank you so much for everything that you've given to us today, and we've really enjoyed the conversation. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon, and congratulations for your Auckland Art Gallery exhibition. Yes, tomorrow.
Well, thank you for talking. So really, yeah, it was lovely.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, and we look forward to hearing your news as things progress.
Stay in touch. Don't forget about me.
We won't. Thanks, Kate.
Bye.
Bye.